Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Welcome to Bookstore One. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Bryn Durgan and I'm the Director of Programming here. Again, thank you so much for being here to celebrate Beth Knopik's memoir, Beyond the Rainbow, A Mother's Journey from Grief Through Grace. Through Grief to Grace, I'm sorry. As an independent bookstore, we really appreciate your support. So if you've not yet gotten your book, I know when a lot of you first arrived, we had said we hadn't gotten the shipment in because of Hurricane Ian, which we had not, but then Beth's husband heroically brought a box of books here. So we do have books, so they're right down at the register. So if you did sign one of those sheets, your book is in already, even quicker than we'd expected. Exactly. And then if we do sell out of those books, then we have that sign-in sheet. Just put your information there, how many books you want, and Beth will sign a book plate for you. So no matter what, everybody will get a signed book. So let me introduce you to Beth. Beth Knopik is a Virginia native who has lived in Sarasota for most of her adult life. In 2012, her daughter Leanna passed away from heart disease at 16 years old. Beth's life mission is to preserve, share, and expand her daughter's legacy by helping others through the grieving process. Her book, Beyond the Rainbow, is part of that plan. Beth's goal with this memoir is to ease the path to healing by offering a roadmap through the early stages of grief and to broaden the reader's perspective on loss. So now that I've introduced you, Beth, will you introduce us to some of your family members who will meet in your book?
Hi, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there are a number of family members that are in my book, as you would imagine. But I'm only going to talk about two of them today because they're a part of the readings that we're going to have later on. And of course, 98% of you know me and my family, so this is kind of not really necessary, but the other 2%, my husband Steve, who is over here, and my son Rogers, who is in LA at the moment. He is now 23. And then one more person I'd like to mention is my holistic doctor, Karen Young. She might as well be family because I see her almost, weekly it seems. So those three characters I think are the ones you'll need to know based on the passages that we have coming up. So, and then there's one other passage that the character is fairly well defined or whatever.
So I understand Leanna was hospitalized for about 30 days. And during that time, you used CaringBridge, which, for anyone who's not familiar with the site, although I'm sure a lot of you probably followed this journey, it's where people can give updates on a person who is hospitalized or who needs care on their health journey. And at one time, you eventually amassed over 35,000 visits to your page. So tell us a little bit more about this experience that ultimately led to the writing of this book.
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to show you this book. I'm not sure I can hold the microphone and the book at the same time. But this includes all of the entries from our CaringBridge page. And
how many pages? Let's see.
I think there's 500 pages in there. And it includes all of my entries and all of everyone else's. And then there's some photos in there of Leanna. It's a very nice thing to have. But so I was told about CaringBridge very on in Leanna's hospital stay. She was at All Children's, or now Johns Hopkins, for 30 days. And about 3 days into that, we were told about this website. It's a way to communicate with family and friends, which was great because I was, texting and emailing everybody, and it was overwhelming. So to know about that was a true gift for us, for me. And so I vowed to post every day. And because there were people, as many of you know, that were waiting for the latest update because my daughter was going through a series of very invasive procedures. So this actually became a big part of my book. It became like a journal that I was keeping, and so I used it a lot as a resource for my book, which was great to keep track of what was happening in the hospital because it was all of course a blur. So after Leanna had passed away, some of my friends were suggesting that I write a book. And, you know, I have a degree in finance, and so writing a book was not something in my wheelhouse at that point. So the idea did kind of appeal to me, but I thought, you know, it would be great to have a book that, for my family, future generations of my family, so they would know what Leanna's life was about. And so that was really how I got started. But then I wanted the book to read like a memoir, so I'm like, okay, well, I've got to go take some classes. So I took several creative writing classes online and created some fairly large pieces that really is how I started the book, basically. It's not the way I recommend writing a book, to kind of start in the middle of it, but I had these pieces, then I had to kind of weave together. So
tell us a little bit about your vision for the book then, as in the different sections of the book.
Right. So the way the book is set up is the first half is our time in the hospital. And we, Steve and I, we lived at the Ronald McDonald House for all that time, which was such a blessing. Because in this Ronald McDonald House was inside the hospital. It was on the bottom floor. And so our trek to her room every however many times a day, you know, just made it a lot easier for us. But anyway, the first half of the book is our time in the hospital, and then the second half of the book is our journey through grief.
And it took you 10 years to put this book together. And as we all know, grief is never ending. So can you tell us a little bit about how your perspective has shifted from when Leanna first passed, if you were to write the book, to now?
Right, so had I finished this book in, say, 2 to 3 years, which seems like an average time in my mind to finish a book, the title would have been different, the cover would have been different, the whole intention probably would have been different. It would have been more about Leanna's life and not about my journey through grief. So, you know, as I got more into the writing process and more through my grief, I realized that I had experiences that might be helpful to other people. So, you know, I feel like when you're given those experiences and kind of the wisdom, it's our responsibility to share that. We can't keep it to ourselves. So, and also in doing that, it was, you know, honoring Leanna's legacy as well. So the fact that it took 10 years is interesting. It seems like forever, and there were times when I thought I was never gonna see this day. But there's a purpose to it, and I believe that, you know, it's perfectly timed. So, you know, there's a lot of, like, during the last 10 years, I read a lot of books. I, you know, listened to a lot of podcasts. I watched a lot of TED Talks on grief. And so the book now kind of weaves in some of those insights that I gained from doing all that. And then I also have a list of book recommendations in the back, you know, for, you know, which some of the information that I have woven throughout the book is taken from those books in the list. So.
And speaking of those books in the list and
Yes.
setup,
Yes.
I was telling Beth before that I don't know how many of you may have read Joan Didion, Year of Magical Thinking and Blue Nights, and I was telling Beth that it is, you know, her book is very reminiscent of that, and the hospital experience and then through after grief. And you're never really done processing, so maybe there'll be a sequel. So about the cover, I understand the photograph was taken on a family vacation. Do you want to talk to us about that and the title?
Yes. There's a lot going on with this cover. Let me just say that. Before I talk about the cover, I'd like to talk about the rainbow and have a short little reading. And this is very hard for me emotionally. So, the symbol of the rainbow came into our lives very early, when I was pregnant with Leanna. And I had some concerns about my pregnancy. And the rainbow was my symbol that everything would be okay. And so now Rebecca is going to read a little. If you can come up and just read this one little paragraph that I would read, but as you can see, I probably wouldn't get through it very easily.
Thinking back on those 30 days in the hospital, I had thought when I saw those rainbows, everything will be okay. I've learned that what happened is okay. It's just not what I wanted it to be. It's God's version of okay. He was saying, trust in me. I am with you always. My love for you is deeper than you will ever imagine and stronger than you could ever know. In time, you will see more and better understand. Precisely because the rainbows weren't what I thought they were, they led me to see that there was way more to life than what's right in front of us. The rainbows taught me to look beyond my earthly desires and open my eyes to see God's plan. They held out the promise that something good would come of this, and that promise gave me hope. I still celebrate every time I see a rainbow.
Thank you. So, yes, Michael Klauber took this photo. Photo credit, Michael Klauber. This was taken in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe in 2011. And we were on a family trip, a safari trip, and we stopped in Victoria Falls for a couple days before we went on our first safari with Leanna and Rogers. And so the fact that Leanna was there when this photo was taken is pretty awesome. And when I decided to name the book Beyond the Rainbow, I thought immediately of Michael, and I thought immediately of Victoria Falls, and I knew that Michael would probably have at least 100 photos of the rainbow, because he's an obsessed, you probably don't know this about him, but he's obsessive about photography. And so within probably minutes, I had 8 photos to choose from. So I chose this one and sent it to the publisher, and as you know, they like to edit everything. They like to kind of put their spin on it, which I actually loved what they decided to do with the original photo. Sorry about all my little sticky notes, but on the left side of the rainbow, it's the color's been taken out. It's black and white, basically, gray. And then the right side is the regular color. So it's symbolic of from going from darkness to light. And then my subtitle, A Mother's Journey Through Grief to Grace, I wanted there to be something, a part of the title that was hopeful. Because the book that I think we're going to mention a little bit, the subtitle drew me to that book. And so I wanted to kind of carry that on to my book. And then on the back is a Bible verse, Romans 12:2. It's in Leanna's handwriting. She had written this on a t-shirt because when she fell ill, she was on her way to a mission trip in West Virginia. And she had painstakingly written this verse on the back of this t-shirt because it was like the theme of the work camp that week. And so I was able to take that t-shirt and have it scanned so I can put it, I've made scarves with it, I've made wrapping paper with it, I've done a lot of things with it, but I really believe that this is a message she left us. This is part of her legacy, so I hope you'll take some time and read that, and know that she painstakingly wrote it in puff paint on the back of her pink t-shirt.
Will you read us what it says?
Yes. Do not be conformed to this world, but continually be transformed by the renewal of your minds, so that you may be able to determine what God's will is, what is proper, praising, and perfect. Romans 12:2.
That's beautiful. So some say that the book you should write is the book that you wish already existed, the book that you need yourself. And before you put your book out into the world, tell us a little bit about the book that made the biggest impact on you during your journey.
This book here saved my life, literally. A Grace Disguised by Jerry Sixer. And before I received this book from a family friend, I had read some books that had been recommended to me that were not necessarily very helpful. They caused me even more anxiety. And so I became leery of books, honestly, on grief for a while. And when this showed up on our doorstep, I kind of just took a deep breath and I'm like, I don't know if I can do it. But I looked at the subtitle and it says, How a Soul Grows Through Loss. And that really spoke to me. And I was like, grow? There's something positive to be gleaned from this. And this man, he's a minister himself. He lost his mother, his wife, and his 4-year-old daughter together in one automobile accident, and had left him with 3 children under the age of 10. And he has the most amazing perspective on loss and I'm just going to read you one sentence, this very first sentence of the book, which just blew me away. And you can see I've highlighted, when I first read it, I underlined so much in here that was just so moving me in a really, much better direction. But this is the preface to his first edition. This book is about catastrophic loss and the transformations that can occur in our lives because of it. I mean, that in a nutshell is what his book is about.
It's also what your book is about.
Yeah, what it is, yeah. I mean, my book wouldn't be what it is, I don't think, had I not, kind of taken on his perspective.
Right.
I say that for sure.
Totally. So now, speaking of your book, we'll do a couple of readings from Beyond the Rainbow. So I'll invite Con Nicholas up first to do a reading from the first half. So Beth, if you want to introduce us a bit first to what he'll be reading.
Yes. No, stay. Where are you going?
I gotta get a little place.
Oh, okay. I thought you were...
I'm out of here.
And we still have some chairs over here too. If anybody who's standing, if you want to come, you can come make yourself at home.
Yeah, so this passage I chose is from the first half of the book, which is the most intense part of the book. And I originally chose a passage that I thought was really, really powerful, but it was also, I thought, too emotional for this setting. So I've chosen something that's powerful, but I didn't feel like quite as emotional, but I'm having my beloved friend read this for me because I wasn't sure I could get through it myself. But this scene is from the 3rd week in the hospital when we are desperate for a sign or some sort of message of hope.
Good morning. And I'd just like to say I'm very honored and proud to be here today, sharing this very powerful reading with you. I had lost my sense of self, living day in, day out in velour sweatsuits. Each emotion battered me like an avalanche. I tried to relieve the constant stress through more walks, deep breathing, and yoga here and there. I texted with Karen, who over and over reminded me to take it one moment at a time and to remember the mantra, faith and trust. I lost, regained, then lost again, my precious sense of balance. You can die in a hospital or have your life saved there, but any sense of normalcy I once felt in my day-to-day experience was gone. Every day, sometimes every hour, was like standing on the edge of a cliff. We were always on the verge of something, good or bad news about to come, and ceaseless anticipation depleted us. In the tragic theater of the cardiovascular ICU, we saw infants born with weak hearts to parents who clutched each other and prayed. These little ones were touched by dozens of strange hands, while their parents, who loved them most, wandered the corridors, unable to embrace their own children. I was determined to keep it together by staying present and not allowing my mind to travel too far into the future. I shared little with others, nothing that approached the true depth of my fear. Steve suffered in silence. We were keeping it together, getting through the days. We made sure Rogers was okay and that we were there for our daughter. We exercised and ate. But true feelings were stones that could shatter our glass house. While I sometimes longed for Steve to connect with me emotionally, I also knew that going there could destroy the delicate vessel that we had created to contain our nightmare. Sometimes I would look at Steve and think, no one else can feel what we are feeling. Then I would remember all the other families in the world who were losing medical battles. In our room at the first Ronald McDonald House 2 weeks before, I had begged God not to take Leanna. But I knew the walls of that place had heard the pleas and prayers of so many other desperate parents. We were not alone. Deep in the night, Steve and I sometimes woke to the sound of a helicopter approaching the hospital, its blades chopping the midnight air. Once I saw Steve's eyelids flutter. Then he rose from his pillow. Together, we listened. We heard the engine shut off after the helicopter touched down on the hospital roof. Another urgent case, another desperate family. In the midst of this, a few nurses on the floor thought it might be helpful for Steve and me to meet a mother whose son survived an infection much like Leanna's 7 years before. We met in the waiting room at the hospital. She was a soft-spoken woman in a simple blue dress. She offered me a smile and a hug before introducing her son, an unassuming young man in his mid-20s wearing jeans and a t-shirt. His voice was faint and raspy, a result of the surgeries he'd had, including a heart transplant. During our time together, he said little, but the tender glow of gratitude surrounded him like an aura. As we sat and talked, the woman told me a story about the time she thought her son's life was almost over. I went to the chapel here and prayed, she said, Lord, help me to plan my son's funeral. And while she waited in silence, she suddenly heard a reply, calm and clear, it's not time yet. Fascinated by her experience, I felt a flicker of curiosity. Maybe I should try it, I thought, and we exchanged numbers and said our goodbyes. I walked into the tiny chapel with its modest altar and small stained glass panel and took a chair. All alone in this humble place of prayer, I whispered, God, please give me a sign. Yet while I desperately wanted some indication that God had not forgotten us and that Leanna too would be spared, my gut filled with fear at what the response would be, or that there might not be any response at all. I listened and I waited. Yet, as long moments passed, all I heard was a searing silence, the cruelest answer I could have received. Sitting still in that pain-deafening void, I felt alone, abandoned. When I closed my eyes, deep swirls of red in varied shades twirled about me. What did it mean? I opened my eyes. I had come seeking comfort. I waited some more. Nothing.
Thanks so much for reading that, Con. And now we'll introduce Callie to you. If Callie wants to come up and give a reading. Callie Chappell. And I know that she also wants to, before giving the reading, say a few words about what the book has meant to her. But first we'll let Beth kind of orient us in this next part.
The reading that Callie's going to do for us is the first part of the first chapter of the second half. And Leanna has died. And a friend of ours had shared a story with us 8 years after Leanna had died, about the day Leanna died. And this is another reason why I trust, the fact that it took 10 years to complete this story, because things like that came up. And she said, I don't know what you'll hear. I don't know what took me so long to tell you this, but here it is. And I believe it's a very important part of the story, so.
I might get a little emotional here, I hope not.
I gave it to her, so I don't get emotional.
I'm finished reading it over and don't blow it, Kelly.
She's used to performing, so she should be good.
Yeah, that's
right?
what you thought. I want to say a few words about Beth's book. She called me, was it 10 years ago? I don't know how long ago it was, and said she was going to write a book about her experience with the loss of Leanna and her transformation, her process she'd been going through. And I thought, I told her, oh, Beth, that's going to be so helpful to people who have gone through a similar experience. And what I didn't realize was how helpful it was to me. And I know that any of you who have read this book and will read this book, it's whether you've had a loss like Beth's, or you've anticipated loss or feared loss, or just are on a spiritual journey, or just a human being in this sometimes cruel world and beautiful world. I read a few versions, your first drafts, and I read a few versions of it, and to see the growth, you are really a brilliant writer, Beth, you really are. Just to see that transformation has been amazing. I've never read a book that was so honest. And that was so, you wonder like, oh, I can't imagine what that's been like for her to go through this process. She tells you. She doesn't leave anything out. And it is absolutely awe-inspiring. So now that I got myself feeling like this. I'm okay. Okay. It was over. Just like that, everything shifted. In the weeks prior, hours felt like days, even years. Then, in a matter of minutes, Leanna was gone. It can't ever be that the death of a young person happens without some bigger purpose. That's clear to me now. Yet in the days after Leanna's passing, nothing was clear. Nothing made sense. All our prayers, everyone on Caring Bridge, the Coldplay concert, and all the energy and faith directed toward Leanna's healing had fallen short. The God I'd relied on all my life was nowhere to be found. I gave up on God the day Leanna died. In doing so, I had no idea what I would find or how I would survive. But over time, what spanned the canyon of my grief was something far greater than the faith I had known. Even on the day of her passing, the signs were already there, whether I saw them or not. Back in the summer of 2012, our friend Doreen heard about Leanna's illness. She and her husband joined the tribe of supporters following Leanna's plight on Caring Bridge. In 2020, 8 years after Leanna's death, nearly to the day, on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, an email from Doreen appeared in my mailbox. I read the typical greeting, and then my heart skipped as the message took an unexpected turn. She wrote, "There is one memory that involves you that I've neglected to share before now. It remains one of my most profound life experiences. I regret that I've waited this long. I'm not sure why. Perhaps I was waiting for inspiration to get it perfect in order to do it justice." Eventually, Doreen realized by waiting to tell us she was withholding something of value, so she finally decided to share the following experience from the day Leanna died. It's early afternoon on July 19th, 2012, and Doreen is driving home on Florida's I-275 South, returning from a quick trip to Ocala. As she reaches St. Petersburg, she notices All Children's Hospital in the distance, which brings Leanna and our family to mind. At that moment, a song Doreen has never heard before starts playing on the radio.
She's a songwriter. Wasn't her
I
song.
know. If I die young, bury me in satin, the young female sings, and the lyrics penetrate Doreen's consciousness. Doreen is certain beyond all doubt that Leanna has passed. Tears begin to flow. Then Doreen glances back at the hospital and sees something that leads her to slow down. An enormous double rainbow that appears as if it is coming right out of the hospital. Doreen looks around to find no evidence of rain. The pavement, as far as she can see, is bone dry. So powerful. Now awash in tears, Doreen pulls to the side of the road. Staring at the incredible sight before her, she listens as the song on the radio continues. Lord, make me a rainbow. I'll shine down on my mother. She'll know I'm safe with you when she stands under my colors. Doreen cries as she has never cried before, and she says it is for us, but also for so much more. At that moment, she's convinced that God is ushering Leanna into his kingdom in full glory. It is proof to her that we are never alone, and the promise of everlasting life is real. And I have never looked at a rainbow the same way again, she wrote. It is hard to describe how I felt when I received Doreen's message. Deeply moved, inspired, and filled with awe, gratitude, and most of all, love. Yet not surprised, because in the years since Leanna's passing, I have seen so much evidence of her presence and felt the deep knowing of my daughter's connection to something so much greater. When I think back to how I got to where I am today, I can recall those early days when our loss was so fresh and raw. Not all of the details are clear, obscured as they are by the veil of sadness that descends over me. I was barely making it from one minute to the next. All I could do was keep moving. Performing menial tasks transported me through the day. But in some ways, even this was hard because with each dish I washed, each shirt I folded, I was moving farther away from the last time I saw Leanna. It's a tug and pull, a yin and yang, a sadness together with a sense of accomplishment. On the road of grief, most milestones aren't visible in the distance or even as you pass them. It's only looking back that those seminal moments, memories and moments blend into a story of healing. The day Leanna died was an ending in the physical sense. A bright light had gone from this world. My daughter was gone. That fateful day after Steve Rogers and I left Leanna's side to join our devoted family and friends clustered in the waiting room, all I could think about was how I wouldn't see her beautiful face or feel her arms around me anymore. Yet there were the arms of others around me, Rogers, Steve, brothers and sisters, parents, and other loved ones. One pair nearly identical to the next. The hugs were welcome and needed, and while I was aware of them, I was unable to receive the comfort they meant to provide. Something inside me had gone adrift, and even the most tender hug could not moor me.
Thank you so much, Callie. I also just have to, first of all, sorry we didn't put tissues at everybody's table and that we don't have tissues up here. That was a mistake.
I lost mine.
Yeah. And then I also want to just acknowledge as well, we talked about a song in that passage, and there are musicians who who can't play certain songs in concert, right? Because they feel so moved by those songs and so affected, especially when they have to do with grief. And by Beth sitting here today and sharing this with everyone and being up here, it's essentially a concert full of, grief songs in that way. And it's so impossibly hard, but I think everyone here agrees that you're doing it so beautifully, and everyone else who's shared so far. So I also want to now invite Rebecca up, as if we need, any more incentive to buy the book, but Rebecca's going to talk a little bit about what it's meant to her.
Okay, so when Beth asked me first if I'd read this story, I was really conflicted, to be honest with you. I, first of all, thought, wow, she trusts me to read this story and to be kind of one of the first readers. But also, I thought I knew the story and it was painful, and I was worried about going through that pain. Or maybe even worse, because I hadn't seen Beth's writing, it could be dishonest or not well written and not compelling at all. And that would maybe be a problem in itself. I'm an English teacher. So, lucky for me, I did agree to read it, and I was really, really surprised by my takeaway. And I think that what's been said and the discussion of the title alludes to all of this, but it's really a surprisingly uplifting read. I'm sure everybody in this room has lost somebody near and dear to them, and I have as well. And I wish so much that I had this book as a companion, the wisdom in this book as something to help guide me through the grief that I felt during that time. And in fact, I'm so glad that this is finally being released, because I have tried in a really clumsy way to kind of dispense of the wisdom to people I know who have experienced loss since I read the book. And now that it's out, it can be recommended to everyone. So for me, what this book has done is it really has shifted my perspective completely. It has changed the entire construct for me of life and death and the continuum of existence. I did not expect to walk away from this book feeling like the world is a more beautiful place, because the story itself is so based in such cruelty, it seems. But I definitely did. So it sounds really glib, but you have to read the story for yourself, you really do. I couldn't recommend a book more firmly to anyone who exists in general, and certainly anybody who is experiencing a loss. So I just thank you so much. It's been such an honor.
Thanks. So again, we do have copies downstairs, and if we sell out, just make sure you put your name on that list, and then come up and Beth will sign the book plate for you. But before we wrap up, I know Beth has some people to thank and some last words for us.
Well, just all of you being here, I feel like you're giving me a big hug, and this is what grace looks like in my life. So when you ask what the word grace means, in my subtitle, Journey Through Grief to Grace, this is a part of what grace is for me, is your love and support. And yes, I want to thank you all for being here and for all that support, not just today, but since the day Leanna died and before. Obviously, we have a gazillion entries in this book from you all, and I'm so grateful for that. And of course, my husband Steve, for all of his love and support and patience over the last, we won't say how many years. And my son Rogers, of course. And I'd also like to thank my publisher, Morgan James, and my agent, A Drop of Ink, And because of them, I'm able to be in bookstores like this and hopefully reach a lot more people. So, thank you again. I've left bookmarks around, and when you buy a book, if you plan to buy a book, some people have already bought a book, but if you want to buy another, you will get a highlighter, because I'm hoping that there will be something within those pages that you'll want to highlight and refer back to another day.
Two things, actually.
sorry.
Another last thing. So Beth and I both actually volunteer for, it's called Blue Butterfly, through Tidewell Hospice. And it helps children and their families go through, after they've gone through a loss, to really cope with that loss. It's a totally free program, and we're having Children's Grief Awareness Day is on Thursday, November 17th. So here at the same space, we're having a gathering. There will be a teenager who's experienced a loss to share their grief story, and kind of be able to educate the community on how we all can help children through that process as neighbors, friends, family members, that sort of thing. And there will be a lot of books, of course, on grief here available. Beth's book, naturally. And Beth works with adults who, the parents typically, who are experiencing that loss. So just wanted to let everybody know. And thanks, Beth.